2367, take one.
America works, America plays, America loves, and America worships. I wonder if you know in how many ways and in how many places there are altars of God.
Dr. Lewis H. Evans, Minister at Large, Presbyterian Board of National Missions.
Many of you have seen cowboys bulldogging steers and roping calves and playing the guitar. But how many of you have ever seen cowboys worshiping? Many of you have heard them roaring at a rodeo, but how many of you have ever heard them singing at a camp meeting? You've seen them branding calves for the fire, but how many of you have ever seen them whittling wood and exchanging thoughts by a campfire? You've seen them riding the range, but how many of you have ever seen them saying a prayer at the foot of a prayer tree? It's quite a country. It's quite a thing. Better stay with us for a while. Beautiful as the ranges are untouched, you must bring something to them. The desert never blossoms as a rose until the blade of the plow cuts the desert sod. And the man who cultivates must himself be cultivated if his soul is to bring forth fruit for God and man. For this desert around a man is no more vast and desolate than the desert within him. God has his men placed here and there to keep men from missing life. Here is one of them, Ralph Hall, sky pilot of the great Southwest, whose loving trail has crossed thousands of others in a lifetime ministry. Was there anything particular, Ralph, that sort of pushed you into this? Did anything happen? In your home, you had a Christian home, didn't you?
We had a Christian home. We were way off, way out, long, long way from church or Sunday school or anything of that kind. But Sunday afternoon, we always gathered in the old large family living room, and we had one of these old reed organs, and we sang and memorized the catechism and scripture and all. Then we always had family worship, and Dad always prayed that Sunday evening prayer, especially for a few things, but one thing that I'll never forget, that he always prayed for, and that was for the coming of a minister, or the coming of a missionary out to our community and out to our home.
What do you mean coming of a missionary? None around at all?
No, I began to wonder what a preacher or missionary looked like.
Well, hadn't you known one?
No, we'd out there never had seen one in my life. And,
well, the good old USA hadn't seen one.
But I won't ever forget when that prayer was answered. I coming up in Corral one morning and saw something way over there staring out at us. I climbed the old windmill tower to see if I could make out what it was. I saw a fellow traveling in a buckboard. And he came up and rapped at our door. And I stood there back of Mother in the hallway when she opened the door that morning. And I think that was one of the greatest thrills that ever came in my life when he said that he was a missionary, Sunday school missionary. He'd heard of us and he'd driven out to see us. Louis, I don't think a king ever had any more royal reception or welcome than my mother gave that man. Well, the next 2 days, my brothers and I saddled our horses and we rode that whole country. We went out to the remotest cow camp all over the country, and I remember we told those folks that we had a preacher over to rights and we were going to have dinner on the ground and preaching all day for them to come. Well, that Sunday morning, you could look out across that prairie country, and any way you looked, why, just people coming in every direction. The greatest crowd gathered I'd ever seen in my life. They crowded in that little schoolhouse until, well, I actually thought they were going to push the outfit down, push the walls up. I remember this missionary's backed up against the wall. He didn't hardly have room to stand. Well, he didn't have an organ or a piano, 2 or 3 hymn books, and this fellow would read one stanza of one of these hymns, and everybody would sing.
Well, what was there about that particular day, Ralph, that seemed to impress you most?
Lord, I think it is sitting there on that old flat bench along beside this Christian, courageous pioneer mother of mine. And I remember looking up in her face, and for one of the very few times in my life, I saw just great tears rolling down her cheeks. I couldn't understand then why. I knew this was what she wanted more than anything else in all the world. I know now that they were tears of joy, a wonderful joy that could come only to the heart of a lonely Christian mother. Lord, I know it was that Sunday morning that I purposed in my boyish heart that when I grew to be a man, I wanted to be a minister, and I wanted to be a Sunday school missionary. And in the days following this fellow's visit, as I rode the range, in my boyish daydreams and fancies, I felt that if someday, somewhere, sometime, I could find a community, a home that was as lonely as our community, our home, and if I could bring something of the same joy and sweetness and gladness to that home and community that this missionary brought to us, that life indeed would be rich and it would be full, and I wouldn't ask anything more.
And so Ralph Hall has spent over 40 years of himself making life more rich and full in the cattle country.
You know, you won't see many church spires pointing upward out here on these plains. Usually just a cluster of pitched tents and parked cars will identify the Christian community. But you know, for nearly 20 years, it was Ralph Hall's dream that this day would come when cattlemen could bring their families to these 5-day meetings. And it would surprise you to know that more than 15,000 of them gather to live and fellowship and worship together. And how they can eat.
Takes a chuck wagon and a kitchen crew working round the clock to do this job. An oversized spatula to turn the oversized flat. Everything comes big in the cow country, even the appetite. But no one ever goes away hungry, not for food, nor for faith, not for bread, nor for God. One man's prayer undergirds another out here. One man's experience strengthens his friend. By this prayer tree, as they call it, men make brave vows. They dare God to keep them on some hard errand. They name their sins and come to hate them. They pass along their victories. Christianity is something a man loses unless he shares it. That means when he's playing as well as when he's praying. Christian fellowship is one of the characteristics of the kingdom. And that can be had even in a game of cowboy washers.
Get her close. Yeah, Joe. That's going. Hey! Oh, Hey, boy, whatever.
More than one cooled-off Christian has found his heart warmed and his faith rekindled in the fun and fellowship around a campfire.
Well, this is fine to be out here at the campground and out at the campfire where all these people have the chairs and come out to hear some stories. And as I've said before, Christian people ought to be the happiest people in all the world. They have more to be thankful for and more to be happy about. The Bible says, make a joyful noise unto the Lord. Also says, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. And we do have a good time at these camp meetings. I wish everybody would come and see just what a good time we do have. We have the best chucks in the world, the best cooks, have the best preachers, and then we have the finest Christian fellowship that I know of anywhere in the world. And we are glad to be here and to take a little part in it. We have come tonight just to have a good time and tell some stories. Well, I started to tell this story about the Cowboys' coffee, a receipt for making coffee. They take a pound of coffee and boil it over a hot fire, put a little water on it, and boil it for 30 minutes, and they pitch a horseshoe in it, and if it sinks, they put in more coffee. Dr. Gray from back in New Orleans, he said the way they make coffee over there is they boil it in the cowbell. And when that clapper stands straight up that way, she's ready to serve.
How often a campfire begins with tall tales and ends with sacred testimony. The heart goes into freewheeling, and tongues are loose that were all tied up at noonday. In the shooting flames, men see the dreams that are their own and challenge one another to vows as darting and daring as the flames.
Let's make that resolution tonight that we're going to try to live to where we please the Lord. We're not going to keep you any longer, but it is our custom to have a song, and we usually sing, "Blessed be the tie that binds," and then have a prayer.
Blessed be the tie that brings many of these rancher families over 50 miles each week to Sunday service. Blessed be the tie that draws these cowboys in from off the ranges for the missionaries' visit. Blessed be the tie that brings these folks at cowboy meetings to those who worship in our city and suburban churches and in the sanctuaries of 100,000 small American towns.
It's a tremendous thing, you know, to have upon us the brand of Christ that signifies ownership. From that moment on, the reputation of Christ in his kingdom immediately is at our mercy. And from that moment on, we become his labels or his libel. But the last thing I'd like to say to you is this, that there comes with this brand a sense of tremendous responsibility. His parents, I mean. You see, it's a responsibility for a boy to bear about in his forehead your mark as his sire in his features. But there's also a complementary responsibility that comes to us as parents. Because our boys and girls bear upon their foreheads the mark of our sires.
If we are going to be good fathers and raise children as well as we raise cattle, we shall have to know just as much about faith as we do about feed. And we'll have to know more about God than we do about grain. You talk of your breed of cattle, and you plan for a higher strain. You double the food of the pasture, and you heap up the measure of grain. You boast of your Morgans and Herefords, and the worth of a calf or a colt. And you scoff at the scrub and the mongrel as worthy of fool and a dolt. But what of your boy? Have you conned his needs for the coming year? Does your mark as his sire in his features mean less than your brand on a steer? Thoroughbred, that is your watchword for stable and pasture and pen. But what is your word for the homestead? Answer, you breeders of men. The place where I worship is the wide open spaces, built by the hand hundreds and thousands of them, summer after summer, to clasp their neighbor's hand, to sing the old hymns, to hear the old truths reaffirmed.
So this too is America. So America works, and America plays, America loves, and America worships in so many different ways, in so many different places. There are the altars of God. Built by the hand of the
It's natural that the story I'm going to try to tell begins in a country like this, where the wonders of His creation are right afore you every day of your life, where the mighty hills stand proud and silent over the boundless prairie that stretches under their shadow. The scriptures say, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills. Yes, this is where the story that's in my mind rightly begins. To me, the Southwest is more than just a point on the compass, more than just blank space on a map. It's a living symbol of the Creator's love, and it's a country that's sure grand enough to hold that love for man to find. Such a man was this. For the past 30 years, a missionary of the Lord, a trail preacher. His name? Well, that doesn't matter much in the West. A man earns whatever name he's got anyhow. Earns it through the people he does things for, by the things he does for them. Now, the lonely cabin tucked away somewhere in these hills ain't easy to reach. You call a man a neighbor out here when he's 40 miles away. And as a rule, we ain't given much to fancy houses neither. More than likely you'll find everything a man needs for his family shelter ain't bigger than a room or two. But he's got more than enough room in his heart to welcome a traveler. And more than enough room in his spirit to welcome the Word. Yes, the Word. It's a far piece to go if a man wants to hear the Word in a place of worship made of stone or wood. But if he couldn't, this man sought him out and brought the Word to him and his. Brought comfort, news, and friendly conversation to a lonely people off by themselves. Brought the Christian Word and read it to them from the family Bible. Yes, sir. There's a heap of work attached to riding herd for the main boss. This bringing of his book ain't like farming in a flower pot. There's plenty of ground to cover, and maybe it's more than one man can handle easy, but a man sure can try. This man knew one thing: get God on his side, and he had a majority. And though he traveled alone and lived alone, he never wanted for spiritual company. The hard ground was his only bed for weeks at a time, sharp and quiet. The story, truth, peace, strength. Come roundup time, every man that can handle a rope, a horse, or a branding iron is expected to throw his weight into the job. In the cattle country, time is something that must be taken advantage of. It's a mighty precious thing. Calves don't wait on a man's convenience to be born. And there's many a cowman who won't argue that one with you. No, sir. Time is now, when you need it. And you sure need every good hand to take advantage of it come roundup. Getting them cows in a chute. Getting the fire made and the irons hot. Come on, mister. If you can be some help, lie down over that horse of yours and lend a hand. Say, is that needle ready? Give it to Doc here. Sure, he's a preacher. That don't make him any less a cowman. He's as handy with a needle and a branding iron as he is with the Bible. Well, like I said, a man out here earned respect. Earned it through his acceptance by his fellow man. It wasn't long before this old-timer had a riding partner. I guess it was the way the older man did things that made the other cotton to him. No, not just things like branding or fence riding, but the way he talked. The way he made so many things appear so simple and plain. The way he could make you see that his beliefs, his religion, was a living thing, a spirit, a way of life. And it set the younger man to thinking. I reckon there's nothing that can set a man to thinking deeper about creation than a campfire after a day's honest work. Yes, it's the dancing of the shadows on the trees, giving birth to 1,000 forms a minute that make me feel that way. The younger man had heard the call, and I'm thinking that, well, like a stream of water seeping through 1,000,000 small channels to find its level, the will of the Lord finds its way to men that would receive the call. Yes, he'd receive the call. Like the man before him, he would do what needed doing. Like the man before him, he would make a trail for others to follow. The influence of one man was the spark that touched off a greater thing to come. In the next few years, automobiles, electricity, and 100 other things brought physical comfort. But the West was still to welcome and need men like this to bring the Word and its spiritual comfort. The young'un had his work cut out. His partner labored elsewhere. The scriptures tell us that one soul is worth more than all the world. But you can't just hope a man will follow a straight path without guidance. Like a cow running through the brush, leaving a crooked path for a calf to follow, a man needs assistance to find the Lord. And the young trail preacher gave that assistance wherever it was needed. Through guidance and friendship, he showed folks the way. To many places all over the Southwest this man went and was made welcome, bringing the gospel to those who could not go to the gospel. Yes, it was a big job, this traveling and preaching and trying to do so much. A big job. Big enough to need more thinking, more planning, more counsel. A meeting with the old-timer was arranged out in a good prairie where a man's thoughts could come freely. Sure, anytime you got some real thinking to do, just get off by yourself somewhere out under a patch of blue sky. And like these two hands, don't start nothing until you've had some chuck. If you never ate a meal done over an open fire in a Dutch oven, you haven't lived. You don't need no fancy dishes out here. Just an oven, a pan, and a black coffee pot. Harness that up with the best kitchen in the world, the wide open spaces. Well, with the chuck done and some of the best coffee you're making, the men got to talking a plan to get people meeting in groups. It's a habit of cowmen to think clearly, with maybe a dirt drawing to make it clearer yet. They talked a plan, and once that plan was set, nothing short of the goal they'd fixed would do. You know, starting an idea is like planting a tree. It's got to start small and go by its own strength. The idea of bringing people together to hear the word of the Lord wasn't half as easy as getting people to come to a rodeo, even though the Bible has plenty more to offer. But God started it did. These two had a simple faith, and they shared that faith with those who partake of it wherever a meeting place could be found. And wherever these seeds were planted, leaders came forth from among the people themselves to carry on the work. Now, out here in the West, anytime folks come together, you can bet the girls will manage to rustle up some victuals. Good food, plenty of it, and step up and help yourself. The success of the plan with small groups spurred the trail preachers on to something bigger. But it would need help, and plenty of it. material help from men of goodwill. And when the need became known, there were men who were as quick to act as they were to pray. Men that would give, not lend, the material support so sorely needed. If folks wanted a feeling of security that only the Lord can give, well, they reckon, let's make it easier to give that security to them. Part of the figured plan was to resume the prayer tree meetings already famous in Texas and New Mexico. And here, where the beauty of his workmanship was all around them, these cowmen gathered under the towering evidence of his handiwork, a tree. Just an ordinary tree, but a tree where men of plain habit and living sat and talked about their Maker. And words and thoughts flew like the shavings from their whittling knives. Maybe it's a feeling of doing something that makes a cowman whittle while he thinks and talks. But if whittling would make the rest of the world follow their example, I recommend that the good Lord cause us to be born with a penknife and a good soft hunk of wood in our hands. At such meetings, the plans begun by the trail preachers finally reach the active stage. Cattlemen don't just sit around and talk about getting things done. They do them. 25 acres was donated by one man. Another cattleman gave some cement and sand. Still others gave their labor. I reckon no job was too big for any man. And no man was too big for any job. Yes, sir, these men shared the labor of Christian love by getting out and doing the work. They raised tents for meeting time. Faith and sweat were raising the peaks of their tents, their house of worship. From the saddle-worn traveling of two trail preachers, a more permanent building was setting its foundation. Labors of a few were being assumed as men, a consecrated people, had embarked on a great venture for a great cause. Tents now? Sure. But something else, something bigger was a building at the same time. Reading this sign and following it leads to something great. Yes, sir? This sign points to a mighty good thing, a mighty good way of life. The mission of the two men was beginning to show results. The people of the country flocked to these camp meetings every which way, and all were welcome. Seeing the hundreds of people of all denominations attending these meetings gave these preachers a mighty fine feeling. The crowds were thicker than bees in a honey pot, and a darn sight happier. Some were spreading their blankets on the ground and roughing it. Some had brought tents to live in, till the place looked like the camp of the Israelite host before the Holy Land. But whatever they brought, blankets, tents, bedrolls, or whatever, they all brought the kindred spirit of Christian brotherhood. And when the time came to give voice to their faith, they all trooped up to the big tent that had been raised for them by willing hands. Yes, to give voice to their faith. Maybe these voices of a people that live this close to the soil don't sound like no big cathedral choir. Maybe these voices are more used to driving cattle or singing to lighten the chore. But it's sweet music anyhow, 'cause it comes from well-meaning hearts. singing, there was sometimes famous preachers like this one that gave us their thinking in a clear, firm voice. Preachers that had spoken in bigger places, that's true, but not more sincere places. And what these visiting men had to say went right to the heart. A heap of time back, some wise men said that men don't live by food alone. Well, they don't. But I'm here to allow that food sure helps. And don't these good people know it? Plenty of men in history felt that hunger was good for the soul. Well, maybe so. But they never tasted real Western barbecue. Good eating is one thing these meetings go in for. And no one coming to these meetings pays for his chuck. If he did, that wouldn't be Western style. But somebody's got to pay for it. And somebody usually does, trust the Lord. The cost of bringing water, the cost of bringing bread, the cost of getting all the victuals is a sore problem. But just so long as a man wants to share what he's got with someone else that needs it, ain't no one going to go hungry, either for food or for God. Next time you're out this way, join the chuck line. And when you've got as much as you can hold in both hands, find yourself a place and set. Want more? Partner, get yourself a knife and whittle yourself another hunk of beef. Just listen to the song of hot coals sizzling under the barbecue. Catch the taste of that well-done part with its fake mouth-watering flavor of smoke. Yes, sir, it's a gift of God to make such chuck. And it's gifts to God that make it possible. With a body full of beef barbecue and a soul full of thanks, I say bless them givers that make this possible. Yes, the work of the trail preacher sure was telling. And the way these praying men would get into little groups and talk about their Lord would sure capture your heart. Younger men were taking hold of the mission the older ones were trusting to them. Younger men were leading groups along straight trails. Maybe it would scare half these young'uns almost to death to stand up in front and talk in public. But what they were saying made sense, and listeners knew it. Questions were answered right from the heart, and many were so moved in spirit that they just had to tell someone. Yes, tell them and thank them for opening their hearts. Now, you know that a repentant sinner is one thing the devil can't abide. Old-timer who was moved to give his thanks. And I heard him say to the trail preacher, "For 79 years I made the devil a good hand, but I'm just starting to live today, and what's left for me is a lifetime of joy in praising the Lord." Now I ask you people, what greater reward for work can any man have? In communities all over the Southwest, the seeds planted by these men were growing into strong, tall plants. But like a beautiful tree, it's the new seedlings that make the future worth living for. Youth is the Lord's gift to us, first by being young, then by guiding the young. Regular permanent churches were being built, and in the meantime, people met wherever they could, even in basements like this, to sing out their praises to the Lord. The two cowboy preachers were getting older, but their spirit stays ever young in the young folks who follow their example of living. I reckon children are like new oil lamps, bright and shiny in their newness, but needing fuel from us to make them light up and provide a light for others. In this land, there had been no churches for hundreds of miles around. Camp meetings had filled a mighty gap. But man wants to worship every day, not just the limited times a camp meeting provides for. So these men built the church out of their labor and their love. Needed God all year round? Well, they'd have a permanent church all year round, too. Yes, churches were building, and the Lord's work among the young'uns didn't stop. Didn't stop because there were men to keep it going. Men like the trail preachers who were there with the Word. Men like, well, like you out there watching this truth unfold. Through giving, youngsters are getting a chance to meet with the Lord. Meet with the Lord. To make good Christians. To make good citizens. A man that's done so much to spread the word can well afford to sit back a mite and rest. But the planning and the strategy of these earlier days is bigger than personal comfort. Work with children and young folks has to go on. The trail preacher holds youth conferences all over the Southwest every summer. Instead of the solitary horseman with a bedroll on his pack horse, the trail preacher has trucks. A gift of companions in the church. It's a heap easier today and a lot faster. These youth conferences are far flung. First one here, then pack and travel maybe all night to get to another, some 150 miles away. Then when you're there, there's work to do. Getting equipment ready, bedroom, blanket, tent. And youngsters, well, they are no mean hands when it comes to storing chuck away either. Give them what these conferences give them. A good book and good food, and you've got a handful to take care of. Pancakes and syrup. Second only to barbecue. Ain't nothing sticks to the ribs like pancakes and syrup. No, sir. If milk and honey is the food of the angels, I sure hope I find me a little stack of pancakes to go with it. Brown is a barefoot kid with freckles. Pancakes is my dish at sunup, or any time. Put it away, children, where it'll do the most good. And when you're through with that, there's more where they came from. Put them away and let's have a bit of fun. Watch kids at play. Ever notice how much more laughing there is when they've got a feeling that someone loves them? These kids have. Got men on earth here who do. Someone up there who does. There's a regular program at these meetings and a way of following it out. There's talk by their leaders and counselors where they're taught about giving and sharing and Christian living. The sound of a bugle is the call for vespers. Let's stop what we're doing, young'uns, and start walking up that hill. Let's give thanks to the Lord for his blessing. Folks, watch these lines of children go into prayer and think. Watch these youngsters walking up a mountainside and just think what that means in terms of a Christian future. The Bible tells so much of mountains that you get to believe that most everything that happened in the Bible happened on a mountain. Our Lord always went to the mountain to pray, where he could be alone and quiet. It's no wonder, then, that making these meetings in the mountains possible is the grandest thing a person can do. In the evenings at bedtime, when they're seated and listen to the stories that have faith behind them, their little minds are at rest, at peace. The climax of the youth meetings comes on the last night, when they dedicate themselves to the future in a beautiful fireside service. A fire that throws a light on the straight path begun by the trail preachers. Yes, show them the way, and the good will follow.